With the recent pandemic, a lot of religious people from all around the world must be left puzzled to varying degrees. To some Christians, the virus must clearly come from the devil. However, that begs the question, why can the devil do so much damage to so many people? And probably more importantly, why does an omnipotent and benevolent God not stop this from happening? Well, it does indeed seem very confusing that God would let such a thing happen, and a lot of Christians I've personally talked to in the past also seem confused by the mere discrepancy between what they would expect God to do in such circumstances and what actually happens. Sure, you can easily get rid of that problem by simply compromising on God's goodness. The Christian God in the Old Testament, for example, hasn't been particularly straightforward in his approach to goodness after all. If we look at 2 Samuel 24 verse 16, we see that sending a plague is definitely something that's part of his playbook. Others just attempt to make up nice stories to keep them happy and claim something like, "You should convert to Islam now and everything's going to be just fine." This is obviously false. As far as we know, people from all cultures and religions are affected by the coronavirus alike. But if we actually care about the truth, we have to keep ourselves from falling into these easy mental traps and keep thinking about the problem, trying to find a solution that actually makes sense, rather than just finding a quick explanation and immediately stopping to think about it afterwards to not realize the horrific flaws in our conclusion. So now I want to share my Mazdian perspective on the issue to give you some insights on how I deal with this matter. First of all, I believe that God is inherently good in all of his actions, and there's no one who can be better than him. Goodness is not whatever God does, like some people believe, but there are objective moral values like serving others without expecting anything in return. These moral values don't just apply to humans, but also to God. So how can this be? Why didn't God stop the coronavirus from even coming into existence in the first place? Well, see, God isn't omnipotent. He doesn't hold the power to change anything at will. On first glance, this also seemed like a very strange concept to me, but the more I looked at the world and thought about it, the more it seemed to make sense. God can't be omnipotent with all the suffering and harm that's constantly happening all around us. I do inherently believe that God is solely good, so it seems like the only logical conclusion that God simply cannot be omnipotent then. That doesn't mean that God is absolutely powerless, but he needs to be very careful in choosing the things he causes to happen. God even specifically tells us that he doesn't have the power to heal us and we should try to find cures ourselves. So who or what caused the virus to appear then? Well, there's a bunch of possible answers to that question. First of all, the virus could have mutated simply by natural means. As copying errors slipped into the virus, it might have somehow ended up being enormously effective on humans. I don't know how complex the RNA of SARS-CoV-2 is and how many mutations had to happen. I do expect it to be quite a complicated process. But with the hundreds of billions of viruses being produced by the host animals previously, there's definitely a chance this could have happened simply by natural means. What I personally think is far more likely is that the Deva, something like the Mazdian equivalent to demons but who weren't made by God, took one of their previously made and adapted viruses and made the right alterations to specifically be able to target humans effectively. See, viruses are very specific in the way they work. They usually target a single type of cell, which is why we previously were immune to, for example, the bat-targeting version of corona. As far as I know, SARS-CoV-2 specifically targets human lung and immune system cells to cause ultimate destruction, not necessarily by killing people directly, but by damaging the lungs so much and by tricking the immune system to chaotically destroy even uninfected lung cells that other bacteria can pass through the protective layers and end up killing humans in the end. See, the plan of the spiritual forces of evil is the destruction of all life. That's why viruses were created in the first place. There's even a verse that specifically talks about the Deva making a hostile, destructive swarm that causes diseases and sicknesses in the mortal world. Sounds pretty much like viruses to me. If your target is destroying all life, viruses are pretty much the way to go. It's not like viruses could somehow take over and become the dominant life form. Viruses are not alive to begin with, and if they would take over, there would no longer be any way for them to reproduce. Viruses are just a cleverly engineered, highly, and I mean enormously complex piece of molecular machinery that injects instructions into a cell to infinitely reproduce the virus. I suppose humans are a high-value target since they have the best chance of fighting back in the long run by developing all kinds of treatment and infection prevention mechanisms, so you better try to make them go extinct while still possible. Plus, it's very easy to spread such a disease in our globalized world. I suspect that God was able to slip in some alterations into the virus that made it far less effective at killing people, but that's just a speculation. By the way, I don't expect them to make the virus out of thin air. I'm expecting them to slightly interfere during the copying process or modify the injected instructions when the virus was still in the host animal. After all, why aren't we asking the same questions about all the other viruses of all other species as well? Why would an omnipotent God allow any of them to exist in the first place? Why would one targeting humans be different? What a selfish way of looking at the world, as if animals are somehow less important. They're sentient beings just like us. God cares for all of the animals just as much as he does for us. I hope this perspective was interesting and informative to all of you. If you're a Mazdian yourself, or an atheist, Christian, or just curious, please let me know what your perspective on the matter is. Also, if you're interested in reading more about Mazdian worldviews, you can simply head to mazdian.org to have a read for yourself and make up your own mind. Thank you very much for watching. I've been Mazdian Perspective, you've been you. See you in the next one.